Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to the 12th Mama Charitable Foundation Visiting Professor in Buddhist Studies lecture series. The theme of the series this time is Buddhisms in Japan, Pilgrimage, Ritual, Thought. Today is the second lecture of the series, and we are very happy and honored to have invited Professor Richard Payne again to share with us his wisdom and insight. Before the lecture begins, I would like to invite Professor Mates from the HKU Center of Buddhist Studies to introduce Professor Payne. Professor Mates, please.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Richard, hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you again here. We met a few years ago, it was in 2019 in Bhutan at the Vajrayana conference, the third Vajrayana conference. And I just came back with a fresh memory of this meeting, like we had 4 years ago, or 5 years ago. And I think I don't have to say too much about Professor Payne, as he was introduced already a few days ago. Well, Richard earned a Ph.D. at the Graduate Theological Union, Berkeley in 1985. And his research areas are Tantric Buddhist rituals, like fire rituals, homa, and so on. And after 30 years of teaching and administration at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, you retired in 2023, and you are now Professor Emeritus there. And you are still a member of the steering committee of the Society for Tantric Studies. And together with our director, Professor Halkias, you are the co-editor-in-chief of the Oxford Encyclopedia of Buddhism. And thank you for having come here. And please deliver your lecture on homa. I'm very excited to hear about that, as I have also worked on the Hevajra Tantra, which is the handbook for homa rituals for fire offerings. So I'm quite excited to listen to your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Let me cough first. Get that out of the way to begin with. Okay, good. Can you hear me okay? Especially if I am loud into the microphone. Thank you, Professor Emeritus, for that kind introduction, and I would like to again express my appreciation to the founders of the Mama Charitable Foundation who make this series of lectures possible, and to the faculty and staff of the Center for Buddhist Studies at Hong Kong University. This second lecture in this year's series is on Buddhist ritual, one specific ritual, which is the Shingon Homa. And now I'll move back here. Okay. And I'd like to cover 4 different points this evening with you. First, to introduce the homa ritual, which is known in Japanese as goma. Second, to trace out briefly its pre-Buddhist origins in India and its global spread since that time. Then third, I would like to ask the question, which is, how is it that tantric ritual is thought to be effective? Okay. And that question is very specifically phrased in that way. How is it that tantric ritual is thought to be effective? Which is different from asking, is it really effective? Is it not effective? How is it effective? And so on. No, people believe that it's effective. And how is it thought to be effective? And then in closing, to consider the question of why ritual. Okay, so the homa, the ritual that we'll be talking about tonight. At its most basic form, it's making offerings into a fire. Right? And that actually connects the Indian history with Persian and Roman and Greek practices as well. It's a very similar set of practices across that entire range of cultures. And for the Tantric form, it is rooted in ancient Vedic ritual. Then in the early medieval period, a Tantric version was developed, and this is when the name homa begins to appear. And it came to be practiced throughout the Tantric world. Hindu, we've known about for a long time, and Buddhist for a long time. But just recently, there's been some wonderful work by a scholar, actually a couple of scholars, opening up Jain practices that are basically homas as well. So this is very unusual because it's kind of contrary to normative interpretations of Jain thought. But it is a practice in the Jain tradition as well. Today, the homa is found in Tibet, Nepal, Mongolia, China, Japan, and in some temples in Europe and the Americas. So it has spread globally in the present, and is, I think, a fascinating and important ritual to study. So to begin then, looking at the period from the Vedic India to the modern world, in India, in Indian history, the Vedic period is considered to run from about 1500 BCE to about 500 BCE, that is before Shakyamuni, all right, or just pivotal to. And though Vedic practices and knowledge have continued into the present, so it gets a little, you have to be careful because there's the historical period that's referred to as the Vedic era. There are a set of texts that are called Vedas, and then there are Vedic practices and knowledge that have continued right into the present. So the Vedic ritual system provides the background for the homa. In classic Vedic ritual system, there are 3 altar hearths, 3 sites where a fire is built. Here you can see at the left is the circular fire, which is called the domestic fire. It's not actually, but that's what it's called. To the right, which is to the south, is a half moon altar, which is a protective fire. And to the far right, to the east, is a square altar, which is the place where offerings for the deities are made. The space in between is where offerings are prepared. Yeah. So the homa originates in the context of this Vedic religious culture of fire offerings. One of the most dramatic of Vedic fire rituals is known as the Agni Chayana. This is a long ritual, complex ritual, and it, in fact, the standard 3 fires that you saw in the previous slide become an anteroom, a lobby, a foyer for this ritual enclosure. Right? So that's how much more elaborate it is than the normal ones. But this elaborate construction, both the ritual enclosure and the altar itself, are temporary. Okay. This is not a permanent construction. And these pictures are from Kerala state in southwest India, which is one of the locations where Vedic knowledge was maintained for centuries and centuries and centuries. In fact, I apologize, I don't remember the names of the texts, but there was a Vedic text that was known to have existed, but had been lost over history. And when researchers went to Kerala, they found people who had it in their memories. Right? So that text had been maintained as a memorized text among this population. The very elaborate altar for the Agni Chayana is built in the shape of a bird. And it's a very specific shape. It's not just, oh, let's make a bird out of bricks. No, it's a very specific shape. And you can see that there are a variety of different shapes of bricks, of squares and triangles, and a few other special ones. And there are 5 layers of bricks piled up over many days as a long ritual process. So this is part of the preparation for the performance of the Agni Chayana itself. So the whole preparation is itself a ritualized activity. And baking these clay bricks takes the process of getting everything ready for this ritual began like 2 years in advance. Right? So that's a big investment in time and energy. But at the end of the ritual, at the end of the several days when the ritual is performed, the altar and the ritual enclosure are abandoned. And indeed, the ritual enclosure is burned. Right? So this is not a permanent construction. And the site is abandoned. It's not, you don't come back and use the same site again. And this is a picture of the present day picture of the site of a performance that was done in 1956. And you can see the layers of clay bricks, out of which a very substantial tree has grown. Okay. One of the key figures for Vedic ritual is that of Agni, the Vedic god of fire. The qualities that Agni has is that he purifies and conveys offerings to the deities. So in those hearths, Agni, the fire, receives the offerings, purifies them, and conveys them to the deities. Agni was adopted into Tantric Buddhist rituals. And in the case of the Shingon Gomas, he is almost inevitably the first deity to be evoked in the ritual set of activities. And this is part of the indication of the continuity from Vedic to modern, from Vedic ritual practices through the medieval period, adaptation into Tantra, and then spread to East Asia. And it is very worth emphasizing, I think it's important to emphasize, that Agni is fire, and fire is Agni. So this is not an abstraction. It's not like, oh, there's fire, and then we'll abstract from that, and then we'll call that Agni, and we'll give him a name and pretend he's... No. The fire is Agni. Agni is not a symbol of the fire, nor is the fire a symbol of Agni. Right? So Agni is considered to be the fire of wildfires, which in California we've been concerned about a lot over the summer. Also domestic fires, which in California we generally don't have anymore. We've got electric stoves. But also cremation fires, which is what you see here. Right? So these are all different forms of Agni. And metaphorically, the processes of transformation become identified with Agni and with fire as well. Thus, the fires of digestion and the fire of wisdom are both considered forms of Agni too. This is a picture of a contemporary Hindu fire ritual. And again, note the square shape of the hearth, which is consistent with those Vedic origins. Right? So out of the three hearths, the one where offerings are made to the gods is square, and that's still used. There's another indication of continuity, of consistency of ritual practice over centuries, is the ritual implements employed. Here on the left is a Vedic wooden ladle, and on the right are a pair of Tibetan metal ladles. Now, these are used at basically the same function in both sets of rituals. They are used to make offerings into the fire. Okay? And with more examples, we could begin to see that there is a similarity and consistency in the shapes of the ladles as well. So homa is in Nepal as well. There's both a Hindu version, seen here on the left, and a Buddhist version, seen here on the right. And just to be clear, the Buddhist version is not a photograph from Nepal. The photograph is a Nepalese practitioner performing the homa in the backyard of a Berkeley professor when his son received his name. So a name-giving ceremony. His wife was Nepalese. They invited the priest to come and perform the homa in his backyard. I felt very fortunate to have been invited to observe and to participate and to be able to take photographs. Because it's kind of really cool. I mean, here's this ancient ritual being done in the backyard in Berkeley. There are, of course, also Tibetan versions. And one of the things that I wanted to call attention to here is that these are done out of doors. And many homas in Tibet and Nepal are done outdoors. Okay? And this differs from the Shingon tradition and the Tendai tradition in Japan, where there are special halls or shrines in which the goma is performed. In those traditions, I've never seen it done outdoors. It's always inside. I have theories about that, but even I'm not convinced by my own theories, so we'll hold off on those. So the esoteric Buddhism in Japan, there are two main traditions, Shingon and Tendai, both of which date from the Heian period, early medieval period in Japan, and they both have traditions of tantric practice. And they both relate or employ or use the structure of the dual mandala, which represents the unity of wisdom and compassion. So on your left is the Kongokai or Vajradhatu mandala, representing wisdom, and on your right is the Taizokai or Garbhadhatu mandala, representing compassion. Now, the portrayals are of two mandalas, and yet they form a single unity. Right? They reflect one another in the way that wisdom and compassion reflect one another. So in Japan, both of the tantric traditions, Shingon and Tendai, practice goma. And the rituals are, in fact, very, very similar to one another. The manuals almost interchangeable. And part of that is a result of the fact that gomas in both traditions incorporate the deities from the two mandalas. So in Shingon tradition, there's a set of rituals that include rituals to the Taizokai and to the Kongokai, but the goma incorporates both of those. And the same thing is true for the Tendai tradition as well. So they're drawing on the same sets of symbolism and integrating that into the Goma ritual. Now, there are other traditions in Japan that also practice the homa, and that includes the Shugendo, Shinto, and some of the new religious movements. So here you see Shugendo practitioners engaging in cold water austerities. I tried this kind of thing for a little while, but got out of the habit real fast. But Shugendo is known as the tradition that practices austerities in the mountains. I mean, that's their shtick, right? That's what they do. That's their program of ritualized personal transformation. Shugendo builds large outdoor homos called Saito Goma, which you can see here on the left. And on the right, you can see that Shugendo is an active part of present-day Japan, right in the middle of the city. I saw this in Kyoto. I don't remember where this photograph is from. But, for example, in Kyoto, right in the middle of the city, there's Shugendo practitioners making big bonfires, burning stuff. Okay? Performing Goma rituals. In the Shinto tradition, here you see the Yoshida Shinto homa altar. There are several different Shinto traditions that in the medieval period integrated homa and other esoteric tantric practices into their ritual programs. The Yoshida tradition was a major one. It was one of the first ones to get really organized and systematized, and they developed a homa, a Goma ritual, which is an interesting hybrid because it brings together Tantric Buddhist ritual forms with Taoist symbolism and Shinto deities. So this is recognizably a Buddhist altar in that it has the arrangement of offering bowls and the wands and so on and so forth. But the 8 sides are based on influences drawn from Taoism. Right? The normal Shingon altar is square. It's not octagonal. And around the ritual enclosure, in a Shingon ritual, there would be the 5-colored cord closing in the ritual space. Here, instead, it is the gohei paper banners that enclose the ritual space. So Yoshida is just this really fascinating integration or hybridization of Tantric Buddhism, Taoism, and Shinto. But if you look at this, you can see that it doesn't look like it's being used. Right? That looks really, really clean, right? That's because this is in a museum. Okay? This is the original altar that the founder of Yoshida Shinto used in Kyoto. And it was relocated from that little Goma altar, the little Goma hall, which is also 8-sided. It was relocated from there to a museum in Tokyo. But why? In the middle of the 19th century, the Meiji government issued a mandate called Shinbutsu Bunri, separating kamis and Buddhas. And that divided institutionally. Every institution, every religious institution in Japan had to either identify itself as a Shinto shrine or as a Buddhist temple. Now, when we were talking about pilgrimage, I showed you several instances, or at least indicated that there are several instances, and showed you a beautiful picture of torii arches on a Buddhist temple. The effect of this mandate varied across the country. And even where some separations were made, things since then have in some cases gone back together. But what I didn't realize, I most of my exposure when I was there was to temples where there was, like on Koyasan, there was a big Shinto shrine. Right? And there are lectures every month, debating contests where the priests engage in this debate about the Lotus Sutra for the karmic benefit of the Shinto deities of the mountain. Now, that was what I knew. A few years ago, I was taken to a place, Miwa, one of the major traditions of Shinto that also had Goma, and learned that there had been a very large Buddhist temple right next to the Shinto shrine that exists today. Like, I forget what 1,200 monks, something like that. Very large temple. And it has almost entirely vanished. Not only from the history, but also from the landscape. There, I believe, is just one marker left of what had been a major Buddhist temple. So in different places, this mandate had different levels of effect. In one case, virtually the total destruction of a temple. In other places, they continued to get along. But what did happen at that time is that all Shinto shrines, Yoshida, Miwa, and the others that had integrated Goma into their ritual program, stopped doing it. Right? They no longer performed rituals that were based in Tantric Buddhism. So the Shinto Goma is only, and in my mind, an important part of the history of Japanese religions. It's not an active living practice anymore. Okay, and so also in some of the Japanese new religions, so these are defined as those that were established from the middle of the 19th century on. And it's kind of an important category of religions in Japan. They've been the object of a great deal of study, both by Japanese scholars and by Western scholars. And two of them are Shinyo-en and Ogonshu, which both have tantric dimensions to them, which both have gomas. So Shinyo-en was established in 1936. Its headquarters are in the Tachikawa district in Tokyo. And this is the altar hearth in the headquarters building. And I had, again, the good fortune to be able to observe the head of the sect perform a Goma ritual on this altar. I've been pointing out the shapes of altars, right? And you'll note that this one, although Shinyo-en is rooted in Shingon, the founder was trained in the Shingon tradition. They have the only 5-sided altar hearth that I know of. And I wish I could give you a reason why, but I have no idea. It's just absolutely unique. Nobody else does it like that. And unfortunately, I can't explain it for you. Another one of the new religious movements is Ogonshu, which was established in 1954. So it's relatively new of the new religious movements in Japan. So as you can see, Ogonshu uses outdoor fires that are based on, effectively identical with, those performed by Shugendo practitioners. And the tradition also incorporates Tibetan tantric imagery as well. So you can see the very large painting behind the fires on the right-hand part of this slide. They make I think these guys make the biggest fires of all. These are really, really big fires. And when they perform them, they'll have like 1,000 people show up to watch and observe and, in a sense, participate in these ritual performances. I don't know where these photographs come from, but I did see a ritual just like this in southern Kyoto. Okay, so I would like to talk about what I think of as the logic of ritual identification. That is how tantric rituals are thought to be effective. And this is very, very similar to what is known as deity yoga in Tibetan traditions. The ritual logic is based upon a series of symbolic associations. Okay? And it begins with the idea that the chief deity of the ritual is made present in the altar, is evoked into the altar. This is an actual altar that's in use. This is after a ritual has been performed. You can tell because the offerings, the bowls that contain the offerings are empty, and there's various items scattered about on top of the hearth altar itself. At the end of the performance, the fire dies down. The fire had been built here, and this is a lid that was put on top of the hearth that goes into the altar table, mandala table itself. So the deity is evoked into the center of the altar, which is a mandala, into the fire, and the practitioner ritually becomes identical with the deity. The body, speech, and mind of the practitioner become the body, speech, and mind of the deity. And this is known as the threefold mystery. The body becomes the body of the deity by making mudra, by making the hand gestures. The practitioner's speech becomes the speech of the deity by reciting mantra. And the practitioner's mind becomes identical with the mind of the Buddha, with the mind of the chief deity, by visualizing mandala. So one often hears Tantric Buddhism talked about in terms of mudra, mantra, mandala. That set of three is, in fact, very, very important for understanding the logic and the way in which the ritual is effective. And I would like to emphasize that ritual identification, the visualization, the Buddha being me being the Buddha, this is a practice to be done. It is not a doctrine to be believed. Lots of Western scholarship on religion gives primacy to doctrine, to belief in doctrine, and treats ritual and practices as, in a sense, derivative from doctrines. In this case, there's nothing to be gained by believing that you're identical with the Buddha, except maybe some mistakes. Yeah? Because this is a practice to be engaged in, not a belief to be adopted and held. In fact, this one of the problems, actually let's back up a little bit, because I want to talk about this a little bit more. I think that one of the problems for the Western study of religion is that it grows out of largely Protestant thought, Protestant Christianity. That the ideas that formed Protestant Christianity became the basis by which the religious studies developed in the 19th and early 20th century. Okay. And Protestant Christianity places a great deal of importance on belief and on proper doctrine, orthodoxy, proper doctrine. And in fact, for some Protestant traditions, belief is what is salvific. Proper belief is what will get you saved. Right? That's what works. And so that emphasis, that theological emphasis, continued into the development of the Western study of religion until, indeed, the present, where still doctrinal texts, doctrines are given a great deal of primacy. Yeah? And I think that that's fine for some traditions. Right? It's certainly the case for Protestant Christianity. But I don't think it works so well for the study of Tantric Buddhism. I think, in fact, it is misleading for the study of Tantric Buddhism. It's what you do that's going to be important. It's the practices that you actually undertake that will lead you to awakening. Belief alone doesn't do it. That was a dogmatic statement. Okay, so to continue with this symbolic system in which Tantric ritual is understood to be effective. So ritually, the deity's mouth, the mouth of the hearth, and the practitioner's mouth are one. Right? So this is part of the unity between the deity and the practitioner, and because the deity is made present in the hearth, in the fire, the mouth of the hearth, the mouth of the deity, and the mouth of the practitioner are all identified. The offerings that are made represent the practitioner's own conceptual and emotional mistakes. Right? This is a classic pair of categories that go back to Indian Buddhism. Right? The fire is both the deity's and the practitioner's own wisdom energy, purifying these mistakes. Right? Earlier I talked about how Agni purifies, that the fire purifies. Right? And it is the fire of wisdom that the deity has and the practitioner has that purifies the mistaken ideas about how the world works and our mistaken ideas about how we should feel about the world, our emotional and conceptual mistakes. So making offerings into the wisdom fire transforms them, and the identity of practitioner, deity, and fire makes this visualized transformation possible. So when I finally got that, it was like, oh, okay, I'm offering my mistaken ideas about the world and my mistaken attachments to the world into my own mouth, which is the deity's mouth, which is the mouth of the hearth, and the fires of wisdom and the fire on the hearth, transform those. It's a very, very interesting process of visualization. Okay? One of the main figures for the Shingon tradition is a figure known as Fudomyo, Sanskrit Achalanata Vidyaraja, or the immovable wisdom king. His primary text is the Chandamaharoshana Tantra, and he is the chief deity in several of the Shingon Goma. You see, he holds a lasso in his left hand. He holds a lasso, and in his right, a sword. The symbolism here is that we don't like to give up our mistakes. We're very attached to our mistaken conceptions and our mistaken emotions. It's scary to give those up, and we want to run away. And Fudomyo will chase you and catch you with his lasso and cut those away with his sword. He's absolutely immovable. Well, besides chasing you. But symbolically, he is in intense meditation, seated on, you can't see it, but seated on a rock. And from the intensity of his meditation, the flames emerge around him. And it's very hard to see in this photograph, but the flames are described as Garuda-headed. Maybe you can get a hint up here just to your left of Fudomyo's head. There's a shape of a Garuda head facing down. The Garuda, of course, is the bird that can consume poisonous snakes, right? Who can consume poison and transform it. So again, the same symbolism of transformation is employed in the very flames that surround Fudomyo. Another key figure for the Shingon tradition is the great Sun Buddha, Dainichi Nyorai, or Vairochana Tathagata. There's a great deal of, in my mind, ambivalence about whether Vairochana and Mahavairochana are the same figure. There are some scholars who say, no, they're different figures and shouldn't be confused, because Vairochana shows up in a number of texts. Okay? And great Vairochana, shows up in a number of other texts. But it's a matter of our categorization as to what constitutes the same Buddha or different Buddhas. Okay. And the main text is entitled the Vairochana Abhisambodhi Tantra. So going on the basis of the name of the text, I'm okay with calling him Vairochana. And he is also the chief deity in many Shingon rituals. One of the unique teachings of the Shingon tradition is to say Vairochana is the Dharmakaya Buddha. Right? So there's the Nirmanakaya Buddha, which is the physical Buddha, like Shakyamuni. The Sambhogakaya Buddha, which are the celestial Buddhas, figures like Amida and so on. And then there's the Dharmakaya, the Dharma body. And almost everybody else says, well, if that's the absolute form, if that's the ultimate reality, if that's the way things really are, it must be static. But the Shingon tradition says, no, give me a break. Vairochana teaches these two texts. He is the Buddha who speaks, the Vairochana Abhisambodhi Tantra and the Vajrashikara Tantra, which are the two main ones for the lineage, one being the basis for the Kongokai mandala and the other for the Taizokai mandala. So two sets of rituals, two mandalas, two texts, but Vairochana Buddha teaches in these. So this is a unique idea for the Shingon tradition in comparison to other interpretations of the Dharmakaya, that the Dharmakaya is an active force in the world, teaching the Tantric tradition through these two tantras. So looking at another set of symbolic associations. I mentioned before that the altar for Shingon is a mandala. Right? There's a square, central, various offerings around it. It's known to be a mandala. In the center, it wasn't so evident with that Goma altar, but there's kind of a vestige, the handle almost of that lid is kind of like a little stupa. Right? But on a regular altar, there is a stupa in the middle of the mandala, at the very center. And secret oral teaching here, this is worth your coming out tonight. Inside the stupa is another mandala. And on the center of that mandala is another stupa. And inside that stupa is another mandala. And so on infinitely. But if we look at what the stupa means, it is the 5 elements of both the human and the Buddha bodies. Right? The bodies of both humans and Buddhas are made up of 5 elements. This is one of the bases upon which the sense of identity can be asserted. Right? We're made up of the same stuff, same 5 elements. Now, originally, stupas were funerary mounds, but also symbolically the 5-element body of the Buddha. And you can see a very nice illustration of the structure of the stupa and the Buddha body and the correlations between them. So that stupa in the middle of the mandala, that is the hearth, that is the altar, is the Buddha. And so in that complex fashion, involving several symbolic associations, the Buddha is present in the stupa at the center of the mandala that is the altar and the hearth. And by visualizing identity with the Buddha in the ritual, the practitioner realizes they're always and already awakened state. Okay. So this is one of the big dividing lines in Buddhist thought. Is awakening something that you work towards gradually, right? Accumulating good karma and insight over thousands of eons and rebirths? Or is it something that is actively already present and you just need to realize it? Tantra falls on the latter part of that. This picture is of the Javanese monument Borobudur, which, again, people argue, is it a mandala, is it not a mandala? I look at it and go, that's a mandala. I mean, come on. And on the top plateau are many different Buddhas inside of small shrines. And it is thought that in the central shrine, completely covered, is another Buddha. So here we have a Buddha in a stupa in the middle of a mandala. And this symbolic representation links the Buddhism of Java and other places in Southeast Asia with Tantric traditions across the entire Buddhist tradition. So, gosh, why a ritual anyway? What is it that we human beings are doing? What's this about? And in relationship to this, I would like to talk about the idea of ritualizing and how that leads to understanding an integral relation between ritual and meditation. Why ritual? So one of the things that we need to make clear is that ritual is kind of an empty category. I mean, it doesn't actually identify any particular set of things, right? There's no you can't point at ritual. You can point at a ritual. You can point at that ritual that's being done, right? But rituals are activities that have been ritualized. And why would we do that? We would do it because it's important. And we do it all the time. You do it in your daily life. You don't have to pick up a New Age manual on how to create rituals for yourself, for harmony or something. You're ritualizing all the time. And that's because we as humans have a very successful strategy for important activities. We make them systematic to be done in the same fashion each time. Repeatable, so it can be done again and again and again, and distinct from other activities, set apart in some way, made special. Now, not all of our ritualizing goes to that extreme. Right? But the more important an activity, the more these qualities are strengthened. And it is these that ritualize an activity. This is a continuum, right? From ordinary wandering around, blundering into things in the world, to highly systematic, arcane rituals. Right? This is a continuum. These are not separate categories. And one of the things that I would again like to emphasize, I think I said this on Wednesday, interpretation comes after the fact. Right? People started wandering around Shikoku Island and then it got interpreted. Right? People start systematically performing activities because they're important, setting aside a particular time to perform them because they're important, setting them distinct from other activities because they're important. Then they get around to giving interpretations to those activities. So this is what I have thought of as trying to free ritual from religion. Western religious studies scholarship often treats ritual as a subcategory of religion. That there's religion, and then there's ritual, and stuff outside of religion isn't ritual. I don't think so. Ritualized activities are not somehow inherently religious in character. Consider the many, many important activities that become ritualized. Checklists for pilots of airplanes before they take off. This is a very highly structured, regularized, systematic, performed the same way every time, at the same time, before they start the engines. I hope before they start the engines. It's a highly ritualized activity, but nobody would confuse it with religion. Similarly, the protocols for medical procedures. There are very, very elaborate and precise and regularized protocols that surgeons follow. And again, nobody would confuse that with religion somehow. And yet they are highly ritualized activities. One of the very earliest ritualized activity that we as human beings undertook was creating and maintaining fire. Yeah. This goes back like a long ways away. And actually the order is a little wrong here. It should be maintaining and creating. Because first we had to learn how to maintain fire. We didn't know how to make it, but we discovered it in places and learned how to keep it and how to carry it and move it from place to place and keep it alive and keep it alive. feed it. And then we eventually also learned how to make fire, how to create it. And here, obviously a very important activity for us as human beings, anthropologically, going back millennia, and also for people out in the wilderness who need to be able to create fire, as in this case. Perhaps not as old, but certainly going back quite a ways in human society, is the feasting of an honored guest. Right? That you welcome somebody into your home, you welcome them to your meal, right? You have a regular way of doing that. It's highly systematized. White linen cloth, crystal, the good silver, the good china, special dishes, special music, so on and so forth. Great deal of attention as to who's sitting where around the table. Right? You don't want this person sitting next to that person, and so on and so forth. So feasting an honored guest is also a very important activity. It's part of what maintains social cohesion. And the homa exists in the intersection of these two ritualized activities: fire creation and fire maintenance, and feasting an honored guest. And the homa is there in the center, and the overlap of the two. So fire maintenance, fire creation, feasting an honored guest, important activities are ritualized. But I would like to emphasize that there is no fixed set of ways that an ordinary activity is ritualized. We're very, very creative. We do this in any number of ways. Sometimes a special time or a special place, special dress, special language, special implements, and any number of other ways that we can set an activity apart and make it systematic and regular because it's important to us. Now, I said before that y'all ritualize, right? My favorite example, I don't know what, grocery stores here seem like the little tiny things, right? Grocery stores in California are huge. You know, they're like 4 times the size of this room, maybe 6 times the size of this room. And if you didn't have a regular way of going through the grocery store, it would take you an incredibly long amount of time. I mean, the first time that I went to a Costco, I don't know, warehouse store, big warehouse, you know, I spent like an hour and a half just wandering up and down the aisles looking at all the goodies that were for sale, right? Now I know where things are. Well, unless I move to a new town and the Costco there is organized differently. But basically, I know where things are. I go in, get it, and come out, right? It's not a big deal, but for me, going to the grocery store is a kind of ritualized activity. Okay, so produce first, then around the corner to dairy, and then down that aisle and make sure we pick up the milk and the yogurt, and then if there's anything in, you know, and so on and so forth. Oh, and, you know, and come back around and pick up the bread. Right? And actually, the people who lay out grocery stores have a particular way of laying them out to facilitate your ritualization of your shopping. Right? That's why the produce right up in front, dairy right next to it, and so on and so on and so on. Now, I don't get dressed up special to go grocery shopping, right? It's not that degree of an important activity, but it is important enough that I have a kind of regular way of doing it. And I like to go on Wednesdays because that's when seniors get a discount. So then let us consider what it means to ritualize Buddhist practice. You know, very, very fundamental for Buddhism is the 2 categories of concentration and insight. Concentration, samatha, is calm, calming the mind, a state of calm focus on the present, and insight, vipassana, discerning the actual, a steady alertness, open rather than focused. So that, there's a lot of different interpretations and nuances, and different people say this and that about the two of them, but broadly across the entire tradition, there's these two categories. But that's not all there is, right? If we think of a broader category of cultivation, bhavana, those states of insight and wisdom, clarity and focus, are not only achieved through silent sitting meditation. Mindfulness, discriminating between wholesome and unwholesome mind state, an active, ongoing process of attention to the present moment, attending to and recollecting attention. Right? This is not some kind of blurry, happy state. This is really focused attention on what's going on with your mind, what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. There's also remembering the Buddha, and the break there between re and membering is intentional. That is, it's putting back together. Right? Putting the Buddha back together. Not as some past event. Right? It's not like, oh, I remember the Buddha. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute, that was my cousin. Right, sorry. But as a present object of attention. This can be done visually by creating mental imagery, such as in the Contemplation Sutra, or as an auditory practice, Buddha name recitation, mantra. Okay. Oh yeah, I was going to show off a little bit and say the word nianfo. Is that about right? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've got all of these different kinds of practices, some of which are called meditation, and some of which are called ritual. And I think that division is purely conventional, purely arbitrary, and depends upon the point of view taken toward the practice. Now, this is contemporary English terminology. Both ordinary and scholarly usage, it tends to dichotomize, to break into two separate, distinct categories, meditation and ritual. Like there's meditations and then there's rituals. These are two separate things. No, they're not. Okay? The two categories actually result from looking at different aspects of the same activity. Okay? To call a Buddhist practice meditation is to focus on its mental aspects. To call a Buddhist practice ritual is to focus on its physical aspects. I assume you're at least somewhat familiar with Zen meditation, hence this photo and this example. So it's called meditation, and most attention is therefore given to the mental aspects of the practice, right? Calming the mind, focusing, so on and so forth. However, if you watch what Zen meditators do, besides when they're sitting there being boring, if you watch what they do, one sees a highly ritualized activity. Even in this picture, where they're sitting still, particular form, particular dress, holding the hands in a particular way, generally at a particular time, repeated every day, same time, same place. And this isn't just in the sitting posture, but the entire practice of going to meditation involves a highly ritualized set of actions. Right? One walks a particular way. One enters the meditation hall with your left. This I just learned because I'm with a bunch of Zen meditators now. So you've got the opening into the meditation hall. Your left foot goes where the door hinges, right? Not the other side. So the door hinges this way, and that's what your left foot is supposed to go in. and going back out, it's your right foot. So it's the foot closest to the why? I have no idea. Right? When we leave the meditation hall, we leave in what I think of as a zipper. I told one of the people this, and they kind of looked at me blankly. But we all line up on the outside of the hall and move in two lines into the center and then merge one after the other and go out the door. And that's a very, very highly ritualized activity. And when there's service, there's the same chants done in the same way with bowing in the same fashion. Okay? So the service is also, so there's meditation and then there's service, and both of them are highly ritualized activities. So there's meditating in ritual, and there's the ritualization of meditation. So we can look at ritual as a kind of meditation. The practice of ritual, such as the homa, creates the opportunity for developing concentration and insight. You have to really be paying attention to be doing something that lasts an hour long and involves 200 or 300 different activities in a specific order, each of which is supposed to be done in the same proper way, and so on. So it's a very, very concentrated effort to perform that ritual. And also involved in the Goma ritual and the Homa ritual, as part of the ritual performance, are visualizations, some of which are very, very complex. Right? Visualizing the offerings going into the mouth of the Buddha and emerging through the pores on his skin, becoming offerings that fill the cosmos and satisfy all living beings. Right? Or a visualization of a mantra syllable on top of a lotus, which turns into a stupa, from which emerges a Buddha, at whose heart chakra is another syllable, and so on and so on. So these are very complicated visualizations, which look an awful lot like kinds of meditation, but they're integral to the ritual performance. Conversely, meditation as ritual, the practice of meditation necessitates making one's activity regular. And this is emphasized from people who take 8-week mindfulness training in the basement of the hospital because it's going to help to reduce their stress. What are they told? To do it regularly. More or less the same way each time, and to repeat it, done more or less at the same time and place on schedule. Right? So even something as secular as modern mindfulness, taught in a medical environment, ritualizes the practice of insight meditation, mindfulness meditation, and set apart. That is done outside of the busyness of life, right? You got to take a little time, turn off the phone, close the door, set aside the time. So these are aspects of, as I say, even the most secularized versions of Buddhist meditation that are ritualized. So, in conclusion then, the Shingon Goma originated from the Vedic religious culture of fire rituals, developed as a tantric form in early medieval India, spread throughout the tantric world, taking a variety of forms in Japan. It involves the practice of ritual identification and reveals the way that important activities are ritualized, and therefore Buddhist practices are both ritualized meditation and meditative rituals. And with that, I would like to thank you again for joining me, for being kind enough to listen to me rattle on about one of my very favorite subjects. Great. And so now we're going to turn it over to some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Payne. Thank you for a very insightful presentation. So the session is now open to the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard, for this fascinating talk with lots of interesting information, like for me also as a specialist. I have one remark and one question. You're right in stressing that ritual is not necessarily religious, and like that we are always looking at belief and like dogma, as the main elements, whereas tantric ritual doesn't stress that so much. But on the other hand, I would also say that tantric rituals include a lot of religious elements. They start by taking refuge to these rituals. You have to generate bodhicitta, you want to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Then you dissolve everything in emptiness and so on. You radiate light to help all sentient beings. And in the end, you do just, dedicate the merit, for the sake of. So it has a lot of religious elements. I mean, that was just my remark. I'm sure you're aware of that, but I just wanted. And the other thing is, I'm curious. These Japanese Goma rituals, can they be traced back to particular Indian tantric texts, like the Vajra Tantra, for example, or other manuals? I mean, are there translations into Chinese and Japanese?
Yes, there's descriptions in the Vairochana Abhisambodhi Tantra. But the continuity between the texts and the rituals, I think we need to understand that there's a great deal of mediation with other kinds of texts, with ritual manuals as such that were being brought, many of which may have been lost. I mean, certainly part of what's important about the Dunhuang finds is that we have a lot of those kind of non-canonic texts, but texts that were practical in use. And I think that a large part of what informed the East Asian tradition of Goma, both in China and then in Japan, was at one level, yes, an awareness of what the Tantras talked about, but then also this continuity of master to disciple training and the passage of ritual manuals. Sometimes, if not, here's yours, but writing it down, the student writing it down for themselves, and then using that and then passing it on to their student, who would make additional notations and so on and so forth. So I think that there's various levels of textualization, and that we need to be open to seeing all of those as important in the transmission. I don't think that we can go specifically to, okay, so there's the Vairochana Tantra, and then they everything that's done in the Goma follows from that. And it's been an awfully long time since I've looked at the He Vajra, and I can hardly wait to get home and look at it again, since you've mentioned this as being such an important text for Homa as well. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is the first patch, huh? Okay, so the question is, was the Homa ritual practice brought into Japan by Kukai, and he inherited it from his Tang esoteric master Huiguo, alongside of the mandalas of the two worlds? And the answer is yes. Right? Kukai brought this ritual. He was part of what he received in China back to Japan, and there are some in Kukai's literature. There's some very early versions of all of the ritual of several of the major ritual manuals, including the Goma, that I have, maybe another lifetime I'll be able to look at those and see what they have to say about how it's changed in Japan over that time. So yes, this is part of what Kukai himself brought back to Japan from China. So is homa a private or a public practice, and is homa done daily or only on ceremonial days, or it varies from sects to sects? Actually, it varies from temple to temple. In the pilgrimage presentation, I talked about the mausoleum of Kukai, Okunuin, that large building at the top of the flight of stairs. Inside there is always a goma going. Right? There are at least 3 that I remember, goma altars, and they're pretty big, that are always in use. Somebody will finish here and somebody will start there. Right? There's always a goma going. So this is like continuous. And what they're doing is when you go to a kunuin and you go in, you can purchase a piece of wood, a stick, and write what you want, your name, your age, and what it is that you want. And then that's stacked up. And those are what are offered into the fire. And that's why there's enough of them that they keep these fires going all the time. There are other temples where the goma is done daily, particularly temples where the chief deity is Fudomyo, is Achalanata Viriraja. Right? If you've got him as your chief deity, it makes a lot of sense to do a homa every day. There are other temples where it's done on a special days in the calendar, on a monthly schedule, and then it is also done at request. I was at a temple where there were daily rituals of the homa done. And then later that afternoon, we went outside and I think it was 5 truck drivers. This was in a mountainous region of Japan. And a group of 5 truck drivers had gotten together to sponsor a goma for their safety. Right? So this was upon special request. Right? This is not part of the daily ritual practice in that temple. Is it public or private? Generally, if it's being done as a training ritual, it's private. It's not kind of open to the public. But almost all the rest of them that I can think of, it's just part of the regular activities in the temple. And so if you happen to be there, you get to observe the homa. One of the most dramatic ones that I ever saw was a temple in Koyasan that had a large side shrine room. I mean, large like this room, big but taller, with a goma altar in the center. And I was told to come that evening. And about 8 o'clock at night, 3 tour buses showed up with pilgrims. And they unloaded, and the first thing they did was they went into that shrine room. And the priest of the temple offered a goma for them. Right? Now by now it's like 9 o'clock at night. I'm really hungry because I didn't get to eat much, and it's dark in there, and the fire's going, and my friend, his job is the taiko drum. And this is a large one. This is one of the big taiko drums. And he's banging away there, and about 200 pilgrims off of those tour buses, they're all chanting in unison the Heart Sutra. Ganji Saibo Zagyo Jin Hanya Ramita Ji, and so on and so on and so on. Actually, they did it better than I can. But that's very powerful. In this large, dark hall with 200 people chanting the Heart Sutra in unison to a taiko drum while that fire is going. It's a very, very powerful kind of experience. And there's the sonic effect alone is part of that power. That slide 16. Okay, so in one of the slides I showed the 2 mandalas, and this question has to do with How is it that they're related to one another? Right? How is it that the two reflect each other? This is, in my understanding, rooted in the basic Mahayana conception of bodhisattva status. That wisdom and compassion are ultimately the same. That insight into the emptiness of all things, insight into impermanence, right, that can become pretty nihilistic. Right? Kind of like, oh, bummer. What's the point? Everything's empty. And this is what a lot of people who hear about Buddhism as teaching of emptiness go, oh, who wants that? Right? I want an extra helping. Right? But the bodhisattva insight into emptiness, into impermanence, into inconstancy, extends to themselves as well as to things and other people in the world. And out of that unity of emptiness arises compassion. So compassion and insight into emptiness arise mutually. It's not that they're two separate steps. Oh, I'm going to get wisdom, and then I'll get around to being compassionate. No. With wisdom, one doesn't have to think about being compassionate. Compassion is spontaneous and automatic. So in that way, although symbolized in the tradition by two separate mandalas, right, the two are united as equal parts, the two wings of the bird. Slide 28 about the deities and my mouth. Why the mouth? Because it is the mouth of the hearth. The hearth has a mouth, right? Isn't that like, it's this round thing. It's got, you throw things in it, right? So the mouth has a hearth. And where do you throw these offerings of food and incense and water and oil? Into the mouth of the hearth. And so the deity is present, and the deity consumes the offerings and transforms them with their wisdom fire. Just as the offerings going into the hearth, into the mouth of the hearth, are transformed by the physical fire. And since the practitioner and the deity are one, it is also my mouth, and I am consuming my own mistaken ideas, my own misplaced affections in the world, and allowing my wisdom fire to transform those as well. Now, this sounds kind of maybe a little thin and airy, but it is an opportunity to think about my mistakes in the world. How have I misconceived the world? What are my mistaken emotions about the world? Right? And to confront those in this ritual process. Right? So it's an opportunity. Not everybody does it. A lot of times I was just working through, trying to get to the next, activity in the ritual. But that is the opportunity. So it's not hands, it's not elbows, it's not ankles, it's the mouth, because that is what is consumed. That is how the offerings of one's own mistaken conceptions and mistaken attachments enters into the fire. Okay, so how would I distinguish rituals from habits? On a continuum. It's not that there is a sharp distinction. if you had to put on your special bathrobe to brush your teeth, and you had to do it at 9:30 at night, and you had to use the special toothbrush and only use a particular brand of toothpaste, that's a little more than a habit, right? And it may be something different from a ritual, but it's certainly much more ritualized as an activity. So I would not distinguish between them. I would say that there are different points on a continuum. So what about the typical items burned in a Shingon homa? There is incense, both in the form of, chip incense and ball incense. There are leaves. There is oil. There are the sticks that one constructs to form the fire. Oil. Water for washing the deity's feet. Music is offered. That's a bell, excuse me. Music is offered in the form of a bell, either a hand bell or ringing a side bell. So these are things that are offered as part of a ritual of feasting an honored guest. Their feet are washed, they're offered music, they're offered lights, they're offered special food offerings, and the oil and the sticks. Okay, so those are the typical items. Now, on Koyasan at least, there are shops that put together these packets, right? So this all came to me in a bag, right? And so I would set up using, here's the 5 on this side, and here's the 5 on this side, and so on and so forth. So I wasn't going out and making chip incense or, grinding it and creating paste to make little balls or anything like that. It's a very well-developed system. One of the curious things to my mind is that the oil that is used in the fire to keep the fire going, right? In India, that's ghee, right? Clarified butter. But there was no dairy industry in Japan when this ritual was brought over. So they use soy oil, or what is called goma abura, which I think is just a wonderful pun, right? Here's the oil for goma. Okay. So there's a substitution. So this is one of the facts about the transmission of rituals, is that substitutions are made. If you can't get ghee, you use soy oil. If you can't get this particular kind of leaf, you can get, we used something called a shikimi leaf, a particular bush, right? So substitutions are a standard part of the transmission and development of rituals over time and across cultural boundaries. Do the shapes of the altar hearths affect their usages or functions in Shingon today? Traditionally, there are 5 functions and 5 ritual shapes, and I've never seen anything other than the round one. And I don't know if that's because nobody actually does any of those anymore, because the round one is used for safety, right, for protection. That's really most basic kind of, most common kind of Goma ritual that's performed. So, as I say, in the literature, one can find these things described. The 5 functions and the 5 different shapes of the hearths. But again, I never saw one. And I didn't make a really big search, but I did look at a lot of them. So, about the idea of freeing ritual from religion. It makes us recall that many people like to start their day by drinking a cup of coffee. It is also an example of performing a ritual, and it has nothing to do with religion. Rituals seem to create a sense of safety and an anchor point to one's life. Yes, that's part of what they can do. And for those of us who are really obsessive about our coffee, we've got special way to use, the grind and the filters and the pot and so on and so forth. Because that makes the best coffee, right? That's the only reason you would go through that kind of ritualized activity, right? Because it's important. Batch 2. Does the homa have any influence on karma? This opens up what is for me I have a minority position in Buddhism about the nature of karma. I think that it is a mistake to consider karma as something that exists out there, like a bank account, right? And like you can put good karma in, and if you put it in the right place, you can get interest on it, so your good karma grows. And then you do bad stuff, and you have to withdraw your karma. That is a very, very, it's like banking. I mean, that's not, I think, the metaphor that we want to adopt in thinking about karma. And I know, as I say, I'm in a minority position here, but I kind of set karma aside from morality. Now, there's a lot of people who don't do that, for whom karma and morality are absolutely intertwined with one another. But looking at the root of the idea of karma, it's action. And all of our actions have consequences. And I think part of the training in Buddhism is to pay attention, to be able to become attentive to the consequences of our own actions, rather than just going on and blundering into more things in the world. There's a line in The Great Gatsby that I think is one of the most memorable pieces of that entire novel. Towards the end, two of the characters are described as being the kind of people who just keep going through life without paying attention to the consequences of their actions. Right? They damage other people, they break other people, and they don't pay any attention. That's what I think Buddhism works against, is that we can pay attention to what we're doing and what it does in the world and what it does to other people in the world. So in a sense, every action is part of karma. There's a kind of a big deal about, meditation will change your neurons. So you should meditate. Well, anything you do, everything you do, changes your neurons. Right? This is not something special. It's something that is good to be aware of, because we might want to be a little more attentive to what we do because it's going to affect our neurons. And in the same way, we can pay attention to our actions because those have consequences. And I, of course, think I'm right, but it is a minority position to reduce karma to something so simple as actions have consequences. Right? Now, I would argue that my view is in fact rooted in some of the Abhidharma teachings, where an action, a consequence, a new situation, we make a new valuation of things, we make a decision about what to do, we take another action, that has consequences, and so on and so forth. So some of the descriptions of how we live in the world in the Abhidharma have influenced my understanding of how karma works. So the question is, can ordinary Buddhists, non-priests, perform goma? No. You have to be initiated, and you have to, in order to learn how to perform it, you have to go through the initiatory process. That was simple. Does the Goma practice in Rinzai Zen tradition with Marichi, oh, cool, as its chief deity, have potential influence from the Shingon tradition? Yes. Zen, both Rinzai and Soto, not Obaku, but Rinzai and Soto, both came out of Mount Hiei. Right? Dogen trained as a priest on Mount Hiei, and then later established the Soto Zen tradition. I'm very suspicious of the fact that most people who write about Dogen ignore the training that he got on Mount Hiei. It's like he was unconscious, he was going through stuff, and then he decided to go to China. Cool, now we can start the story. I think that he learned a great deal on Mount Hiei about tantric thought, because Hieizan, the Tendai tradition, is half exoteric Lotus Sutra and half esoteric tantric in nature. And I'm unfortunately not as familiar with the founder of Rinzai, but my understanding is they all of these founding figures in the Kamakura era were trained on Mount Hiei. And I think that this is something that is woefully overlooked in the writing of Japanese Buddhist history. So yeah, not directly Shingon to Rinzai, but the tantric tradition in Tendai to Rinzai. That's the link that I would expect that one could find. And Marichi is just such a cool deity. You say the ritual practitioners become identical with the deity they worship. Can you elaborate more? This is a 3-part ritual practice at the core, at the center of the ritual performance, in which one starts this ritual identification with body, the formation of mudras, with speech, the recitation of mantras, and mind, visualizing the mandala. So it is the core of the ritual program that then makes what follows from that, what the practitioner does after that point, he, she does as the deity.
In the interest of time, let's take the final 2 questions.
Oh boy, one last one, goody. Where can the Goma practitioner learn how to execute Goma? From guru, university? Is there any common way to evaluate if the Goma is performed properly and if it works? Okay, so where do they learn? There are, in the Shingon tradition, on Mount Koyasan, there are 2 main training temples where priests in training stay for a period of 100 days. They learn a sequence of 4 different rituals in their time there, and it culminates with the Goma. So that's one institutional setting. I understand that Koyasan Daigaku, the university on Koyasan, has a special kind of summer program where the priests who are taking university courses in the summer, taking university courses in the regular year, can take training in the ritual performances in the summertime at the university. My own training was in a private temple. Okay, this was arranged by my teacher at university, who knew the priest in Sacramento, who knew the priest on Koyasan. So through connections, I was able and allowed to learn in a private temple, which is pretty unusual, since that it's only because of the connections that this would happen. Most everybody else goes to one of those other settings. Is there a common way to evaluate if the Goma is performed properly and if the Goma works? Okay, is it performed properly? Yes, I mean, there's a very strict ritual program which is laid out in the manual, and that's what is followed and that's what is done. Right? And it's hard to think about how it might be done improperly. But I will tell you that temple where the truck drivers came and sponsored ritual performance for themselves, the priest at that temple had also trained in tea ceremony. And I gotta say, his performance was the most elegant one I ever saw. I mean, the way that he moved things around, his hand gestures, his movements. I mean, because he was accustomed to doing tea ceremony in the same elegant, aestheticized fashion, that carried over into his performance of the Goma. So it's not like it was somehow more proper, but it was certainly beautiful. And I don't know how to evaluate whether or not a Goma works. How do we evaluate whether or not meditation works? It's the same question. And who is it to make that evaluation? Same question that I raised on Wednesday about how do we motivate a pilgrim, how do we evaluate a pilgrim's motivation? That's not our job. How do we evaluate the pilgrim's experience? Not our job. If it's transformative for the pilgrim, then it's been a success. If the ritual performer of the Goma completes the Goma and has done it properly, it is for them a success. And I take it that we need to wrap here because some people need to run out of the room off to the ferry. Thank you very much again for being here this evening, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Payne. So, the last lecture of the series will be given by Professor next Wednesday, same time, same venue. Hope to see you all again next Wednesday. Have a nice evening. Thank you.